So just this morning I got a message from a friend in Bangalore who had seen the one-page ad in the Hindu about the program details and said, I'm truly envious of you, Maharaya. You are in conversation with Mani Shankar Aiyar. I'm a big fan of his. I said, why? He speaks French fluently and many other languages too. So there are many virtues to the...
I'll answer them in French.
So yeah, I'm really happy I'm in conversation with him about this book, which is truly special in many ways. It's of course his life story, but it's also the story of the Indian Foreign Service, as well as a bit of the political bureaucracy, electioneering, etc. I mean, as a social scientist, I was just delighting in the details that he shares with us. You know, there's big history happening, but he's very, very careful to give us extraordinarily important small details, as it were, that puts the events in a totally different perspective. It's very candid, extraordinarily candid, and he's a great storyteller. You know, you just can't stop reading the book. I'm not really doing a pitch for the book unobjectively. I mean, it's truly special in many, many ways. The first question I would have for him is and this book was written during the COVID years, and he told me last night that he wrote 500,000 words, which had to be pared down into a 2-volume autobiography, the first one of which is out, and another book was also published earlier this week.
No, it's the same publisher.
Same publisher.
It's part of this original manuscript.
Yes.
But she felt that what I'd written about Rajiv Gandhi was political biography and not autobiography. So she insisted on making it a separate book. And then there's a 3rd volume that will come later, sometime this year.
Okay, thank you, Mani. The Hindu Lit Fest is special in many ways. One important way in which it is special is it gives 50 minutes per panel. Rarely do you find this happening in Lit Fest, but even those 50 minutes I feel are inadequate to discuss a book such as this one. I mean, there's simply too much. It's a huge canvas. We'll try to see, how best to do justice to a book such as this one. Very quickly, as the person who introduced you just told us you've written many books before, but this is your first attempt at an autobiography. Did you have any models for writing this autobiography? Is there some sense of
I didn't think there was anything that happened in my life that would be of interest to anybody else. But when the publisher, Chiki Sarkar of Juggernaut, suggested I write my autobiography, it was at a reception where Sonia Gandhi was present. And Sonia Gandhi urged me to write my autobiography. At that moment, I knew that she had no further political plans for me. So because my political life was coming to a dead end, and I said, well, I'll think about it. It took me 4 years and the COVID crisis to really get down to writing it. And I have a gentleman called Venkatraman who has been with me for the last 35 years. And he is an amazing archivist. So he had stacks of material which he kept passing on to me, and so the whole story started getting longer and longer and longer. But the result was that we now have 3 books where the contract said it would be 1 book.
Okay. Your mother is a very important person in this book and clearly in your life, and she's, you can't read the book without getting a strong impression of her as being a very strong person. She had 4 children, and she was very careful that your education was well attended to.
Sir, do you mind holding a mic?
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Yes, indeed, my mother has been a big influence on me, and was a somewhat exceptional woman. She was born in Trichy district and brought up in Shulamangalam, which is part of my former constituency. And she was orphaned at the age of 8. Her mother died in 1916. Her father died in 1918. So she was farmed out along with her siblings to members of the extended family who just treated them as servant girls. But fortunately, Sister Subbalakshmi, here of Madras, who was running a home at an educational institution for child widows, she learned from my mother's elder sister, who was in that same school, that this child had been left behind in Shulamangalam. So she fetched up at the Pashupati Kovil station and just kidnapped my mother from home. And when the members of that family learnt that their unpaid servant was being taken away from them, they fetched up at the railway station, and the woman in hysterics said she was going to throw herself in front of the train. And my mother, of course, wanted to save her life, but she was held back as a 10-year-old girl by Sister Subbalakshmi. The train started. The relative wisely decided not to throw herself in front of the train. She came here. She received a scholarship of 5 rupees a month from someone whose name she didn't know. She called her the Rani of Andhra Pradesh. And then when that lady died, the Ramakrishna Mission paid for her to finish her schooling. She went to Queen Mary's. She got a degree in chemistry and then decided to take up a profession in the Madras Education Service. Madras at that time extended all the way to Berhampur in Odisha. And so she was posted to Visakhapatnam. And when she arrived in Visakhapatnam, the authorities there didn't know what to do with her. Because in 1929 or 30, when this happened, there was no knowledge of a 20-year-old girl being without a husband, being without a family, and there weren't any working women's hostels. So they wondered where she could put her up. Fortunately, the Vice Chancellor of Andhra University had a very large house. So they approached him to take a paying guest. And thus my mother became the paying guest of the Vice Chancellor, who was none other than Sir Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan. And that was to play a major role in my life later. But then, after she taught first in Visakhapatnam and then in Nellore for about a decade, she decided that the only way her career would make progress was by going to England. And there's a gentleman called Satyanathan who was responsible for the backward classes report in Madras. He was a friend of the family and he loaned her the money. She took a boat from Bombay, a Lloyd Tristino liner, in August of 1939. And when the liner reached Suez, the Second World War broke out because Hitler invaded Poland. And she was on an Italian liner as a subject of the British Empire. So everybody on board was worried as to whether when the ship reaches Italy, which was an Axis power, they would be put into prison as foreign aliens for the rest of the war. So she spotted that Ambalal Sarabhai, the great industrialist from Gujarat, was traveling in the first class, and she decided that when the ship got to Port Said, she would get off the boat at Port Said if Ambalal got off, and if Ambalal Sarabhai continued, she would continue. As it happened, Ambalal got off, so she got off, and then found herself in a country called Eritrea. There was a port, a very flea-bitten port called Basawa, and there a P&O liner picked her up, brought her to Colombo, and she was back in Madras within a month of leaving with a huge debt on her head, no employment, no prospects of an employment, and no husband. So in the meanwhile, her trunk had been stolen, so her only possessions were the sari that she was wearing that day. Then her sister, who was at Lady Harding College in Delhi, called her and said, well, there's no prospect for you in Madras, so come to Delhi. And with some hesitation, Amma got onto that train, and as she got onto the train, she was told by her sister that somebody would meet her at one of Agra's two railway stations. The first one is called Raja Ki Mandi, and the second is called Agra Cant. And so when she arrived at Raja Ki Mandi, a man who was only 5'2" and very slim, he was the friend who was going to show her the Taj Mahal. So she herself was 5'1". So she was only an inch shorter. So she said she'd take on this guy if he misbehaved. And they got off at Agra Fort. They went to see the fort. And at the fort, as some of you may know, Aurangzeb, who had imprisoned his father Shah Jahan, had placed a small little mirror at the eye level of Shah Jahan so that he could look at the Taj Mahal and see where his favorite wife was buried. And neither of these two, one 5'1" and the other 5'2", could actually see the mirror. This story by my mother then ends with her saying in a horrified tone, and this man offered to pick me up and show me the mirror. But for some strange reason, the story was never continued as to whether she was picked up or not. But the fact was that they were married 6 months later, and I'm the consequence of that. So I owe my birth to Adolf Hitler. If he hadn't invaded Poland, I would never have been. And so I often wonder whether it was worth taking humanity to total destruction just in order that I might be born and write this autobiography.
Thank you, Mani. You actually go on to share a few personal details that some may hesitate to share. In the sense you say that your parents did not have a particularly, they were married.
Oh, it was a terrible marriage.
No, just a quick sense. The larger question here is when you're writing for the public, you're sharing your life experiences. I mean, how did you handle the notion of privacy? I mean, what do I share, what do I not share? That sort of a thing.
Well, as a child, I had to witness the two of them quarreling all the time. And I'd never understood what were the issues that were dividing them. But they were endlessly screaming at each other. So it was obviously inappropriate that they had married each other, even though a love marriage in 1940 was a somewhat unusual experience. And the marriage actually broke down on the day of the wedding. For as they entered the nuptial chamber, my delicate father said to her, I actually wanted to marry your sister. Can you imagine what that meant for the mother? So my mother, anyway, despite this, she bore him 4 children. I was the eldest, there were 2 other brothers and then a sister. And the youngest one was born here in Madras because she was very keen that at least one child should be born here. But to just take the story a little further, a few years later, after partition in 1953, my father was traveling to Bombay. He was a very frequent flyer. And his aeroplane crashed. He died. And she became, after being an orphan for the first 20 years of her, or 30 years of her life, then being a married Sumangali for 12 years, she found herself a widow. So as an orphan and as a widow, she learnt how to make her way in the world. And so she would be ruthless about imposing on the hospitality of others, of ensuring that her children continued this very expensive education that my father had started, which he could easily afford because he was a very, very successful chartered accountant and income tax advisor. But then he died, and my mother's choice was between buying a house in Delhi and renting out the ground floor, or moving with us and making us day scholars in the same school, and thereby saving on expenses. But we were denied even a fan in the house for the first 3 years or 4 years after my father died. And we went to a very expensive school, and I grew up with very expensive fellow students, very rich fellow students, but I had to wear school clothes during the holidays, and that was very embarrassing. So when an uncle of mine bought me a Devanand-like t-shirt, it was such a major event in my life that even today I recall the date on which he bought it. It was the 16th of June, 1957.
Towards the end of the book, when you have just won the first Lok Sabha election, your election in 1991, you say, I quote, "I was born a Brahmin, but since my early adolescence, I had denied my twice-born caste. It is that denial which enabled me to make it to the parliament," unquote. And you're trying to explain how the voters might have liked you.
Well, it was, number one, Amma was a highly religious person. But strangely, she was also a very secular person. And so we had people from different religions in our home, and we'd go to their homes. But she herself was a fanatical Hindu. And looking at her and her way of life, while on Saturday evenings I wanted to be at jazz clubs, we were forced into bhajan mandalis. And her idea of a holiday was to take her 4 children and go to the Shivanand ashram. And we had to clap our hands and listen to this man droning on about the other life and so forth. So I became a virulent atheist. And I still am an atheist. And of course, by becoming an atheist from the Hindu religion, you also reject the categorization in the Hindu religion. And so I felt that being regarded as a Brahmin, or being called a Brahmin, or following Brahmin practices was a completely reactionary thing to do. It was a discriminatory thing to do. And although one was very proud of the heritage of education that my Brahmin background gave me, in fact, my mother actually kept us in the same school despite the expenses, it showed that there was a lot in the culture that we belonged to that required preservation, but the ritual and the social practices were completely wrong. And I had a lot of Muslim friends, and I saw that in their community there was none of this social stratification. There were rich and poor Muslims, of course, and the rich did behave in a very arrogant manner, the Ashrafis. But overall, there was a message of equality in Islam, which I didn't find in Hinduism. But there were a number of other practices in Islam that I didn't like. So there was no other religion I wanted to go to. I just wanted to say basta to all religions. And when I came, I was the first Brahmin to be elected from a rural constituency after independence. In 1937, there were a number of Brahmins, Rajaji particularly, R. Venkatraman, who were Brahmins that did get elected. And then this quotation that you just took was from a book by M.M.S. Pandian called Brahmin and Non-Brahmin. And in that he picked my election, where in fact, just at that time, the Dravidar Karaham had put out a notice that every non-Brahmin should be equipped with a pair of scissors, so that if they saw a poonal, they could cut it. So in my election meetings, I would take the trouble to take off my shirt and tell them, you can come and cut my poonal because I don't wear a poonal. And then I threw a challenge. I said, you get the biggest patro that you have in your village and cook chicken biryani in it and call my rival, who is a Varnier, and me, and let us see who eats more of the chicken biryani. So this denial of my Brahmin heritage, the denial of my Brahmin identity, I think helped greatly in winning that election. But I've seen that after having prevailed for the last 60 years, the Congress has been finished since 1962. And I don't see it reviving for the next 50 years. But it was those who prevailed. It's very interesting that the DMK chief ministers relied almost exclusively on Brahmin civil servants like Guhan and Narayan to dismantle the Brahminical system. So they had ability, it's simply that they belonged to an unjust social order. So it was in fact through them that the Brahminical system was undone here. And by the time it was undone, the Brahmin, I think it ceased to be the object of hatred and social discrimination. So I was lucky that I stood for election in 1991 and not say in 1967, in which case I'd have been definitely defeated.
Yeah. So in addition to caste, you mentioned your Tamil wasn't as strong as you would have liked it, and you said you had not understood rural Tamil Nadu as well as you would have liked, and you didn't know how to tie your veshti properly. All of this got corrected through your political tenure.
The biggest problem was the veshti. I didn't realize that a veshti is not tied like a pajama. So I used to tie it over my stomach. And as I'd have quite a big pot belly, as I breathed, the knot would unloosen. And as I've said in my book, I succeeded in getting elected without revealing all my assets to the general public. Then only subsequently did I learn that you have to tie the knot on your side so that the movement of the stomach doesn't cause the veshti to be untied. But I now find that most of the people in my constituency wear a thick green belt. That was not acceptable to me. But I am glad to say that now I'm able to keep my veshti up and therefore my spirits up. As for Tamil, they just forgave me. It was Amma who forced me to learn some Tamil. She actually made me read the whole of the Mani Megalai and the Silapadiharam without understanding what I was reading. But she had given me the basic structure of the language. And the only thing that I really lacked was the vocabulary. But it was very easy to pick up that vocabulary simply because this was going to be the fourth language or possibly the fifth language that I was beginning to learn. And as you learn more languages, you acquire the ability to try and pick up the words. So although my Tamil remains pretty defective, I get away with it by saying, Neenga pesaradu Shen Tamil, na pesaradu Yen Tamil. And with that, they accept me.
Thank you. So, clearly, Pakistan occupies an important place in your life. You were born in Lahore and you share many, many anecdotes about, your experience in Pakistan that earned you so much goodwill. You were Consul General between 78 and 81. And the very first thing you say you did was to give permission to a group of Muslims who wanted to meet a Hindu saint.
Let me tell the story.
Yes.
I wanted very much to be posted in Pakistan because earlier, immediately at the moment that the surrender documents in Dhaka after Indira Gandhi's liberation war were being signed, I was asked to become the secretary of a committee that had been formed of very, very prominent and eminent economists to decide on what goods we needed to ship out to Bangladesh as emergency aid to enable them to receive back the 10 million refugees that had come to India. And in the course of that work, which lasted about 6 months, I had the opportunity, largely because the Indian Army was in occupation of Bangladesh for about 2 or 3 months, of using army helicopters to travel all over Bangladesh. And I met a lot of people and they told me of the atrocities that had been committed by the Pakistanis. But my own experience of individual Pakistani diplomats was that they're a very civilized people. So I couldn't understand how a civilized people could behave in the bestial manner in which the Pakistan army had behaved in Bangladesh, and which was really the reason why they lost the war so badly and 93,000 soldiers were in occupation. So I was desperate to get to Karachi, but I was posted at that time in Baghdad. I'd only been there 2 years when All India Radio informed me that Atal Bihari Vajpayee had announced the opening of the Consulate General. Now our postings are normally for 3 years. So I said, God, I've missed this opportunity. But 2 weeks later, I got a telegram saying I had been appointed as the Consul General to Karachi. And I went to Pakistan expecting to be in a very hostile country, where I'd have to talk about Kashmir all the time, where I'd have to defend our treatment of the minorities, where everything about India was going to be viewed with skepticism. I landed in Karachi on the 14th of December 1978 at about 1 p.m. At about 2 p.m. I was in my office. The telephone rang, my clerk picked it up and astonished me by saying, it is the office of the Deputy Commissioner of Sakkar on the line. It's not normal for a district officer to be in touch with a diplomatic representative. So I picked up the phone and I found that at the other end was the liaison officer who had been appointed to look after an Indian sadhu who had fled from Upper Sindh at the time of the 1965 war, and L.K. Advani had arranged with the Pakistanis for him to come back to give religious instruction to the rather large Hindu community that still lives in Upper Sindh. So I listened to what he had to say, and I said, well, what's your problem? And he said, all this was in Hindustani. He said, it's terrible, sir, I don't know what to do. Your Hindu sons, murids, Muslim murids, want to meet him and get his blessing. So I said, yes. He said, sir, will you give me permission? I said, of course I give permission. So the first thing I did in Pakistan was to allow a Hindu sons, Muslim murids, to meet him. So this astonished me. Then at almost the first party I attended, there was a gentleman sitting next to me as you are. I asked him, he was very taciturn. So I asked him a banal question. I said, oh, have you been to India? And the man said, yes. So I said, really? And where did you go? He said, Meerut. So I said, Meerut? And how long were you there? He said, 3 years. At that point, I realized he was a prisoner of war. So I was very embarrassed. But looking at what had happened to my face, he said, there's an excellent bottle of port laid down in the Sindh Club. If you and your wife will join us to dinner tomorrow night, then you sign for the bottle, because in Zia's Pakistan, neither Muslims nor even Muslim diplomats could do so. But as a non-Muslim, I could do so. And he said, of course, I'll pay for it. So after this very convivial dinner, we were walking back to Hindustan Court, where I live. And my wife, Sunit, said to me, this is an enemy country, right? And it's a question that has reverberated in my mind for all the 3 years that I was in Karachi. I have never been more warmly welcomed. I have more friends in Pakistan than I have enemies in India, and that's a very large number. They were lied to. They were told that one Muslim soldier is equal to 4 Hindu soldiers. This was changed to one Muslim is equal to 40 Muslims, 40 Hindus. Then they were told that one Muslim is equal to 400 Hindus. And then they find that 93,000 of their Muslim soldiers are prisoners of a Hindu army. So that had completely altered their perspective. And since most of Karachi consists of the Mahajir, that is those who left India, but almost none of them left with their entire families. So their families are in India in about 320 districts. And their biggest desire is twofold. One, to meet their families in India, and second, to read the Fatiha over the graves of their loved ones who have passed away. And this is a religious obligation for them. So when I opened the visa office, I was encircled by about 5,000 visa seekers who couldn't believe that the office was not be closed. So I went among them to tell them that, why don't you go away, come back after 2 or 3 days, there'll be more space for you. And then I saw an old woman crying on the side. So I walked up to her and I asked her what was the matter. And she said she'd been in the queue for 2 days. And then there was a very strong call of nature. So she went to the Karachi Cant lavatory. And when she came back, the boys who had taken her place refused to let her come to that place. So she told her to go to the back of the queue. At that point, I decided that I would stamp every single visa application form with a date. I could do 300 visas a day. So the first 300 forms was stamped the 1st of April. The second was stamped the 2nd of April. The third lot of 300, the 3rd of April. And I told them that you come at between 9 and 10 in the morning and submit your application form. You come back between 4 and 5 in the evening and we'll get your visa. They didn't believe me. But when we reached 50,000 visas, when we reached 75,000 visas, my name was all over the place as having facilitated them in the most important task they had. So when we were coming up to 99,990, I asked 10 Pakistani journalists to act as my visa clerks. I said, you give the passports. And when the 1 lakh visa was given, I said to the chap, I'll pay your visa fee. And I gave him a tin of tea. And there were slogans inside the visa office. They were shouting, Hindustan ke Consul General, Zindabad, Zindabad. They were saying, Yahan koi pabandi nahi, which means there are no restrictions here. Yahan koi rishwat nahi, there's no bribery here. And you made a name. And if you give them hatred, they'll give you hatred 20 times back. But if you give them love, it's amazing how friendly they are. So the people of Pakistan are our single biggest asset. And the trouble with the Foreign Service, to which I have belonged, and to which in a sense I will never leave, they know how to make friends with Paraguay, but they don't seem to understand how to make friends with Pakistan. What they're not realizing is, if you engage with Pakistan, it takes no time at all to come to a resolution of issues. But if you don't engage with them, if the only engagement is a surgical strike and sending your Air Force to Balakot to kill a crow, well then naturally they are going to retaliate with an F-16 coming and shooting down an Indian plane and this boy, this wing commander, being made a prisoner of the Pakistanis. So what I don't understand is why we have the courage to do surgical strikes against the Pakistanis, but we don't have the courage to sit across a table and talk to them. And when we talk to them, the results are tremendously encouraging. Under Dr. Manmohan Singh, a process was started of talking about Kashmir. We not talking about films and television and media and people-to-people visits and visas. What they talked about was Kashmir. They talked about it on the back channel for 3 years, and it ended with an agreement on Kashmir which could have been signed if the Musharraf government had not got into trouble.
Okay.
So my conclusion is we must have at least the good sense to talk to Pakistan. And if we do, then I think we'll be able to find solutions.
Thank you. We have 5 minutes for ourselves and then the 10 minutes that will be shared with the audience. A quick question. When you were a student at Cambridge, Amartya Sen was teaching economics.
Yeah.
And you said you saw eye to eye on most things except on the question of decentralization, which you felt he had no sympathies for and which you loved a lot. Just 1 second. But you also appreciated the fact that Rajiv Gandhi cared a lot for decentralization. And your longest chapter is on Rajiv Gandhi in the book. And the new book is Why He's the Most Misunderstood Prime Minister. So can you just give us a brief response on this? We don't have much time.
First is about Amartya Sen.
Yes.
He was only 26 years old. He'd just been made a lecturer at Cambridge.
Yeah.
And although as the most junior lecturer, he was given the 9 in the morning, the 9 to 10 slot, when it was bitter cold and there was snow on the way, and yet his classes were the most popular. I became a good friend of his at that time because I was more or less his age. I was 6 years younger than him, but 6 was not such a big gap. And I got on famously with his wife. So when I got involved with Panchayati Raj, I thought the main person who could support us in the academic sphere was Amartya Sen. But for some reason, Amartya has refused to support me on Panchayati Raj. And that has been a huge source of disappointment for me because I get the impression that these economists live at an intellectual level. They don't go down to the grassroots. As a politician, I spent all my time, I was elected 3 times and as a member of the Rajya Sabha 6 years. So for 21 years, I have been wandering the villages and the slums of Mailaduthurai to the point where my supporters tell the lie, Kal Padada Gramam Gadayade. It's not true. There are some villages I haven't visited. But I have gone, and the only thing I do when I go is to straight go to the poorest part of the village, which is also where the Adi Dravidas live. And you ask them what their problems are, and you see whether you can help in sorting them out. So I've discovered that all schemes exist. There are plans for everything. But the last mile delivery does not take place because the bureaucrat at the grassroots level is socially superior and educationally superior to the people he serves. So instead of regarding him as a servant, he's called a government servant. Instead of regarding him as a servant, they look upon the BDO as a master. And so they don't even voice what they want. So what we need is government by the people, for themselves, not at the highest level, but at the village level. And that is what Panchayati Raj is essentially about. It's about power to the people. If we can only empower the people. Earlier today I was listening to a discussion on how the backward classes were empowered. Yes, the backward classes have got empowered. And some of the Ashrafi Muslims have got empowered. But the Pasmanda Muslim and the Dalit particularly have not been empowered. And therefore they live as labhartis. They are the ones who are the beneficiaries of munificence that comes from Delhi. Whereas it's their right. And they alone are able to steal their right and exercise that right. That is what is lacking. I attended the session on Will India Be Rich by 2047, and the answer I came away with is that Ambani will be even richer, Adani will be even richer, but the people of India will continue to be poor.
Thank you, Mani. 2 quick questions before we throw open the floor to the audience, and we need really short answers. One, your love for the country is evident throughout the book. I mean, it's an interesting autobiography in the sense your ambition is transparent, you're pursuing your passions. but at the same time, your love for the country is intact. They're not, that it's in tandem. So given where we are today, which doesn't need to be spelt out to an audience like this, what do you see as the sources of hope? And another question, somewhat unrelated, is what did you find most difficult? What did you find most difficult while writing your own life account?
Well, I feel that India today, I don't want to talk politics. Well, let this be the only political sentence. I think India today is really at a moral nada. We cannot run this country with the Prime Minister as the head priest. We've got 200 million Muslims. We said to Jinnah that you can make an Islamic republic if you want, but we are not going to make a Hindu republic. And we were a secular country. Now this country based on religion is collapsing. There is neither political stability, nor economic progress, nor social progress. They are really in a very, very bad way after losing half their country. And the basic reason is that they thought they could make a country on the basis of religion. And when they made a country on the basis of religion, the Sindhis said, we are Muslims, but what about our language? The Baloch said, we are Muslims, but what about our language? The Pathans said, we are Muslim, but what about our language? And the Punjabi said, I speak Punjabi at home, but I'm required to declare Urdu as the official language. And of course it was worse in Bangladesh. So on the basis of religion, you can't have a nation. If religion is the basis of a nation, then why is Afghanistan independent of Pakistan? Why is Pakistan not merged into Iran? It's because religion is only one criterion. There is a sense of nationhood which is greater. And the Muslims of India were given an option in 1947 which the Hindus of India were not. They could go to Pakistan. Hindus couldn't. And the Muslims who chose the option of not going to Pakistan, of remaining in this country as a minority, they have proved their loyalty. So how can this dog whistling go on? That the Muslims are a kind of fifth column sitting in India, and what do? Every Muslim icon, Shah Rukh Khan, go to Pakistan. Salman Khan, go to Pakistan. Amir Ali Khan, go to Pakistan. Saif Ali Khan, go to Pakistan. Why Pakistan? Why not Indonesia? Why not Saudi Arabia? Why not Bangladesh? So it is by running this anti-Muslim campaign, this anti-Islam campaign, Pakistan, instead of being a foreign policy issue, has been made a domestic issue. Because how can a government which is making friends with Pakistan not make friends with Indian Muslims? And if your domestic policy is to get your Hindu vote by discriminating against Muslims, then you can't be friends with Pakistan and enemies with Indian Muslims. And so all Muslims are categorized together. And it results in the Prime Minister of India telling Israel on the day that they were going to launch this awful war in Gaza, that we are in total solidarity with Israel. How can we be in total solidarity with the people who say that their country is going to be based on religion, Judaism in their case? So therefore, we really need to go back to being a secular country. I believe we became a secular country in the middle of the partition carnage because our people said never again. And for nearly 60 years, 65 years, we were able to remain a secular country. Now we may lose an election. We perhaps will in 2024. But what is 10 years or 15 years compared to 5,000 years of Hindu civilization? The Rig Veda has a beautiful sentence which sets out the skepticism in the Hindu mind. It asks, after describing nature, it asks the question, who made this? And it answers that question itself by saying only he knows. And the next line is the punchline. It says that perhaps even he doesn't know. That is the skepticism that underlines the civilization of India. And I'm sure a 5,000-year civilization will assert itself against 10 years of misusing religion for politics. That is why I remain optimistic, and that is why, although the Congress party is totally neglecting me, I refuse to leave the party. I belong to a secular ethos.
Thank you. I think we should ask questions. We have 5 minutes left. We'll just take
That
this
lady
gentleman.
wants to ask.
You had a question. We'll just take questions all
Yeah.
at once and then you can
Yeah.
respond to them together. Yes.
I think ladies first.
Thank you so much, sir. My question, pardon me if it's a bit edgy and probably a bit politically incorrect, but this entire thing that you made as a point that, when you can have when you can be politically diplomatic and you can sit across a table and solve a matter, what, do you think that is by logic, if you go back to tracing it, why we had the partition in the first place, that failed? Because as people, we have fought wars together against the British and we would have never wanted to actually separate. And like you said, based on religion, which is an identity they have not even been able to hold on to. So have the diplomatic relations somewhere like failed, like they have failed somewhere to actually...
What is happening in India today is that Jinnah is winning the argument. He said we were two nations. He said that we are not a minority. We Muslims are a nation, and you Hindus are a nation. It's interesting. I was just looking through a big book on Jinnah. He never said anything anti-Hindu. He just said you are separate. You eat differently. You dress differently. You speak differently. You pray differently. You dance differently. You sing differently. So you are a different nation. And now we are proving that Jinnah was right. And that is the tragedy of what is happening today. And it is the reassertion of the real India, which was an India which spread its arms and welcomed everybody. The first Christian church was built in India by St. Thomas. The first mosque was built in Kerala when the Prophet was still alive. The Parsis running away from the Iranian Muslims were welcomed in India. We have several religions that have been spawned basically by Hinduism, like Sikhism and Jainism and Buddhism. Now, are we going to reject all this? Are you going to have a New Delhi that does not have a Qutub Minar? Are you going to have an Agra that does not have a Taj Mahal? Are you going to have an Ajmer that doesn't have an Ajmer Sharif or near a home? Are you going to have a Nagur without a Nagur Sharif? Well, I refuse to live in such a country. And therefore, I think India will eventually win. Bharat will eventually win. Although some elections, India may lose. I'm talking about the India Alliance.
Maybe two quick questions.
Hello?
And you can have a short
Yeah,
answer.
very short. Sir, I'd like you to throw some light, especially for the edification of those born after 1995, on your innings as the speech writer for Rajiv Gandhi.
Can you be heard at the back?
Can you hear me? I would like you to throw some light on your innings as the speech writer for Rajiv Gandhi, how it came together. Would he actually look at what you read, wrote and make suggestions? And simultaneously, do you admire any other political speechwriter both in India and abroad? Thank you.
Well, Rajiv Gandhi was at school with me, but he was 3 years junior. And in a school where you're there for 5 years, the seniors don't know the juniors, but the juniors know the seniors. So Rajiv Gandhi knew me, but I didn't know him. Then we overlapped at Cambridge. There, he belonged to the rich set. horrified. I didn't understand how an airline pilot could run a country as complex as ours. Then there came the Sikh riots, and I really condemned that. I decided to vote against the Congress party in the 1984 election, but when I went to the booth, I found my name was not on the voter list. So I didn't actually vote against the Congress, but I went with the intention of voting against it. And then when he became Prime Minister, an elected Prime Minister, he remembered me and some work that I had done on Operation Blue Star with the Sikh community. And he asked me to join him. But he didn't have a job for me. So eventually, I became his speechwriter. And in that capacity, I had to prepare notes or set speeches for about 1,000 speeches that he made on different aspects of India. And I found that his mind was very similar to mine. That his attitude, for example, to Pakistan and China, was that it was ridiculous for India to continue fighting with these two countries, that we should have openings to them. And I was very much involved, at least with the speech writing part of his visit to China and his visit to Pakistan. I was also very, very moved by his dedication to ridding the world of nuclear weapons. And today we have a treaty signed by the required majority in the United Nations, which has demanded the prohibition of the use or threat of use of nuclear weapons. So Rajiv was not wrong. He was simply too early for its time. He solved every problem that had been handed over to him by his mother. Punjab, Assam, Mizoram, Darjeeling. I've written about it all in the next book to this. It's called The Rajiv I Knew. I've also dealt with his controversies. I've dealt with how he handled the Shah Bano case in such a way that the Supreme Court has validated the act he passed on the rights of Muslim women on divorce. And for the last 25 years, Nirja Chowdhury, who was here, mentions the 1985 judgment. She doesn't even mention the 2000 judgment, which said that his action was right. All Muslim women's divorces are settled under that law, and there aren't any complaints about that. So, therefore, he was misunderstood. On Bofors, finally the Delhi High Court said, after 15 years of litigation, that there was not, I quote, a scintilla of evidence that he had taken even one kota paisa, and yet he was described as a corrupt Prime Minister. So I've written that book. I hope you'll read it, and that will give you some idea of how somebody who did not vote for Rajiv Gandhi became such a fad of his that today, 33 years after he was killed, on his way to my constituency, he was coming to campaign for me in Mailaduthurai when he went first to Sri Perumbudur, and that was the end of the story. So I am writing all this, although it's dead history. It's too close to be history, and it's too far away to be contemporary. And most of the audience here, especially the students, were born after he died. So they're not familiar with those problems. So people told me, why do you want to stir sleeping dogs? And I said, my conscience does not allow me to stay. So I've written that second book. And then will come the second volume of my autobiography, which deals with my political life. I've called it a half-life in politics. Because as some of you who read physics may remember, radioactivity has a half-life. What is that? It grows very sharply for a while, and then it starts deteriorating until it splutters out. So my political life was like that. It rose. I became a cabinet minister with 4 different portfolios, and now I'm absolutely on the margin. I haven't seen Sonia Gandhi in a decade. I haven't spoken to Rahul Gandhi except once in a decade. I once met Priyanka. I am out of the Congress, but the Congress is not out of me.
Thank you. Thank you for your patient, sparkling responses. And join me in applauding Mani Shankar Aiyar for his book. And looking forward to the sequel. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very careful hearing you've given to me. Thank you for your applause and for your laughs. Thank you.